Hello, and welcome to Larry Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Larry Dean Doyle, and I am happy that you're here with me today. Whether you're listening during your commute, a quiet moment at home, or somewhere in between, thank you for choosing to spend this time with me. So take a breath, get comfortable, and let's get into today's session. There's a moment in every investigation when you stumble onto something that shouldn't exist, and yet there it is, sitting in plain sight. For me, that moment came when I found a $4 million federal payment buried inside a government transparency website called usaspending.gov. Now, this payment was listed as going from the Department of Veterans Affairs to Bayer Healthcare LLC. But here's the problem. Bayer didn't acquire Monsanto until 2018, and this payment was issued in 2012. So the payment couldn't have been to Bayer Healthcare. It was Monsanto dressed up under a name that didn't exist yet. And the moment you see that, the whole picture shifts. Because what business did the VA have paying Monsanto $4 million in 2012? What service, what contract, what project could possibly justify that? And why would the payment be mislabeled under a future corporate name? That's not a typo. It isn't a clerical error. This is a cover identity, a way to bury a payment that should have raised alarms. And when you place that payment in the timeline of Okinawa, in the timeline of Agent Orange Working Group, in the timeline of Alvin Young reports, it becomes impossible to ignore. Because in 2012 is exact period when Okinawa veterans were coming forward, the evidence of buried barrels was emerging, DOD was scrambling to deny exposure, the VA was preparing to adopt Young's narrative, and the government was trying to contain a story that threatened to break open. So ask yourself, why would the VA be sending millions of dollars to Monsanto, the manufacturer of Agent Orange, at the exact moment the government was denying Agent Orange on Okinawa? Why would that payment be disguised under a future corporate name? And why would every agency you ask about it suddenly claim they couldn't find the records? You don't need to be a forensic historian to see what was happening here. This payment wasn't supposed to be found. It wasn't supposed to be questioned. It wasn't supposed to exist, but it does. And once you see it, you start to understand why the Freedom of Information Act system doesn't work the way it should. You start to understand why agencies stall, delay, and deny. You start to understand why the truth about Okinawa has been buried for decades. Because if this one payment ever had to be explained, publicly, honestly, transparently, the entire narrative collapses. And that's why we're talking about it today. Once you understand the payment, you can finally understand the next piece of the puzzle. The two reports that lock the entire system into place. Two documents, two deliverables, two narratives written by the same man, Dr. Alvin L. Young, one for the VA and one for DOD. These weren't academic papers. They were institutional instructions. The VA report told claims adjudicators exposure was unlikely. Records were missing because nothing happened. Veterans' testimony was unreliable. Denials were justified. The DOD report told the military no historical use, no contamination, no responsibility, no need to disclose, no need to cooperate with the VA. And here's the part that ties it all together. Both reports were built on the same foundation Young created for Dow and Monsanto years earlier. So when the VA and DOD adopted those reports, they unknowingly adopted the chemical company's defense strategy, the industry's liability sheet, the narrative designed to protect manufacturers, the logic that minimized exposure, the framework that blamed veterans. Those two reports didn't just mislead the government, they captured it. And once the VA and DOD adopted those narratives, they couldn't unwind them without admitting They relied on industry's consultant. They denied veterans based on false science. They misled Congress. They misled the public. They protected the wrong people. That's the architect. That's the trap. And that's why the system still behaves the way it does today. People ask me all the time, Larry, why is it so hard to get information? Why does the Freedom of Information Act feel like a brick wall? The answer is simple. The Freedom of Information Act cannot function honestly without exposing the entire structure. If the Freedom of Information Act worked the way Congress intended, the public would have learned the Agent Orange Working Group documents contradict the official narrative, Young's dual roles were never disclosed, the industry-funded science shaped federal policy, the VA and DOD recycled the same false conclusions, the government absorbed the blame, the chemical companies walked away untouched. The rule of law was inverted. Freedom of Information Act isn't broken. Freedom of Information Act is doing exactly what it was shaped to do. Protect the narrative, not reveal the truth. That's why records disappear. That's why searchers come back empty. That's why agencies stall, delay, and deny. Because if the truth ever came out, the full truth, the entire house of cards would collapse. Once you see the payment, once you see the reports, once you see the Freedom of Information Act obstruction, you finally understand the architect of blame that has shaped this story for 50 years. It goes like this. Blame the servicemen and women for Vietnam. Let the government absorb the fallout. Let the chemical companies walk away untouched. That's the pattern. Veterans were discredited. The government became the villain. And the manufacturers, the one who made the chemicals, simply pivoted to Roundup. Same factories, same chemicals, same chemistry, same corporate culture, different label. And because the government had already absorbed the blame for Agent Orange, the public never connected the dots. That wasn't an accident. That was a strategy. This is the part that hits the hardest, because once you understand the architecture, you understand something deeper. The decline of the rule of law didn't start recently. It started here. It started when the government adopted industry's narrative, veterans were denied based on false science, Freedom of Information Act became a shield instead of a window, accountability was inverted, truth became negotiable. The rule of law cannot survive when transparency is performative, accountability is selective, institutions protect themselves, industry writes the narrative, veterans are blamed, and communities are sacrificed. This isn't just a story about herbicides. It's a story about how the rule of law eroded in real time. This episode isn't about a payment. It isn't about a consultant. It isn't about a set of reports. It's about a system that was designed to hide the truth and the fact that the truth is finally breaking through. Because here's the part they never planned for. You're listening. You're learning. You're sharing this podcast. And once enough people understand what really happened, the silence that protected this story for 50 years won't hold anymore. The rule of law may be wounded, but the public still has a voice. And that's where change begins. As I wrap up today's episode, I hope this session gave you something to think about, and maybe even something to carry with you into the day. If this session resonated with you, please feel free to share it with someone who might need to hear it, or may be interested in this topic. And don't forget to click the follow icon so you don't miss future episodes and sessions.